Days passed slowly as winter crept in quietly across the states. The festive haze of Christmas had barely faded, and for once, there wasn't blood in the snow or silver rounds in my jacket. After the vampire mess in El Paso, Edgar and I called a truce with life and took a break. Not the kind where you go off to sip margaritas on some overpriced beach, just enough time to get our heads screwed back on. I went back to Mama's place, where the casseroles never stopped and the neighborhood gossip was intense. Edgar vanished, though I wasn't surprised. His apartment, yes, he lives in a house filled up with secrets and classified cryptid belongings, was locked up tighter than a military vault. Before leaving, he handed me a thin envelope, nothing more than a whisper of paper. Inside was a short message scribbled in that old, familiar scrawl of his. "See you soon, young fella." On the back, there was a phone number and a note that simply read, "Call me in 10 days." That was it. No further instructions, no dramatic warning, just Edgar's usual cryptic nonsense. Back at Mama's, things spiraled back to southern normalcy, which meant family, food, and her latest obsession, matchmaking. Somehow, I got roped into setting up a Tinder profile, thanks to Mama and her arsenal of neighborhood aunties. She took a few pictures, made me stand by Dad's rusted Ford, chest up, chin turned like I was modeling for a backwoods calendar. As men, we don't usually bother with these things, but she insisted, saying I needed someone to settle my spirit. Truth be told, I wasn't looking for anything. The adrenaline still pumped from recent hunts. Monsters don't take holidays. Haven't hunted properly any dogmen, vampires, yes, it was quite a thrill, and lonely Friday nights with the Reaper file trying to study every pattern of these cryptids. Before this line of work makes you a badass, it will turn you to a nerd for sure. I still had flashes of Rick, my old buddy, the one I watched get torn from existence by a dogman in broad daylight out in Nevada. That moment rewired something in my brain. Still, Tinder was strangely numbing. Mindless swiping became a temporary escape, hours spent thumbing through profiles that blurred into one big plastic smile. Then out of nowhere, I got a match. Her name was Cindy. She worked at McDonald's, had bold eyes that carried a kind of haunted confidence. Not fake haunted, but real haunted. She didn't look like she belonged behind a counter asking if I wanted fries with that. Mama, of course, lit up like a Christmas tree when she saw Cindy's profile. According to her, strong hips meant strong babies, and that was apparently the highest form of qualification a woman could have. Dad remained the usual stoic wall, cold but not unkind. The kind of man who said more with silence than he ever did with words. He was the one who first introduced me to Edgar, believing that line of work might keep my PTSD in check when nothing else could. By around 5 in the evening, Cindy and I were deep into conversation. It started with jokes and casual talk but shifted fast. We exchanged numbers, and then she surprised me by asking if I wanted to come over for dinner, her place. That raised a few alarms. I mean, this was Tinder. Normally, it's the guy pushing the pace. But something about her seemed familiar, like the calm before a really bad storm. Against better judgment, I agreed. Some blocks east and I was standing outside her apartment. Looked normal enough, maybe too quiet, which is never a good sign. I rang the bell and there she was, already at the door. Dressed casually but sharp, like someone who knew she'd be the center of attention even if she didn't try. She welcomed me in, poured a drink, and we sat down for what I thought would be an average evening. After some casual banter and a few sips of whiskey, she hit me with it, out of nowhere. "Do you believe in monsters?" I paused, caught mid-sip. The question was blunt and delivered without a trace of humor. For a moment, I thought this was some elaborate joke, maybe even a setup. But the look in her eyes said otherwise. She wasn't playing. I almost laughed it off, almost dismissed it as folklore nonsense. But something in me, maybe instinct, told me to answer honestly. So I did. I've seen monsters, I told her, voice steady. Real ones, not the kind from cartoons or Halloween stories. Vampires that drink you dry in seconds, creatures that mimic voices to lure you in, and dogmen, brutal bastards that don't just kill, they consume. You won't die fast. You'll get ripped apart like raw meat. If they've been hungry long enough, they won't stop until there's nothing left but splinters of bone. To my surprise, she didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned in, her voice dropping slightly. I've seen one too, she said. Texas. A few years ago. Thought I imagined it until the nightmares kept coming. I blinked. You serious? She nodded. We were driving late, somewhere near Amarillo. Me and a few friends. The car headlights picked up something on the road, a massive, hunched shape. Black fur, long limbs, and two ears that looked almost bat-like. The silhouette alone was enough to make your stomach twist. The worst part wasn't even the sight of it, it was the smell. Like rotting meat left out in the sun. It stayed with us. She poured another drink, her fingers trembling just slightly. That night, we stayed at a rundown motel. Nothing fancy, but it was shelter. Around midnight, something started scratching at the doors, all of them. Slow at first, then heavier, like claws dragging along wood. The receptionist called and told us to stay put, claimed it was just bears in the area. But bears don't smell like decomposing corpses, and they sure as hell don't pace outside your window all night. I stayed quiet listening to her. She continued, by dawn, we woke to sirens. Police were crawling the place. A woman from another room had been found out by the dumpsters, scattered in pieces across the snow. Her jaw was missing, her leg torn clean. I saw the pictures. It wasn't a bear. I nodded slowly, processing every word. You know the dogmen in Texas aren't a new thing, right? That areas had sightings going back decades. People report seeing these things around rural roads, creatures with elongated limbs, canine heads, glowing eyes, and a stench so strong it makes grown men gag. Some say they're part of Native American folklore, some call them genetic accidents. But whatever they are, they don't like being seen. She smirked faintly, so it's not just me being crazy. No, definitely not, I said. You're not crazy. She kept talking, rattling off how she believed dogmen keep the scent of their victims, how they stalk their prey over distances, waiting for fear to build before striking. Her words were too vivid, too detailed to be rehearsed. My hand naturally drifted toward my Glock, resting beside me under my coat. Something was bothering me, like an instinct. I really don't know how to explain. You ever feel being watched at night? Feels creepy, right? Cindy, listen, I said carefully. It's late, I should probably head out. She stood and looked at me with a raised eyebrow, playful but serious. You'd rather walk home at night, knowing those things might be out there? She asked with a sly grin. Or you could crash here on the couch. I've got extra blankets. No monsters, just me. I hesitated, everything in me screamed caution. But her tone had shifted. She wasn't teasing anymore. There was vulnerability behind the words, like someone who had seen too much and didn't want to face the night alone. All right, dear, I said eventually, but I'm keeping the Glock close, just in case. Fair enough, she replied. I've got a frying pan. We both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. We talked a bit more, less about monsters and more about stupid things, bad jobs, fast food horror stories, growing up around oddball families. But in the back of my mind, I kept circling back to the same uneasy thought. Cindy wasn't just a random girl on Tinder. She was part of something bigger, and I had a feeling I'd be calling Edgar a lot sooner than 10 days. The morning sun creeped in through the half-closed blinds, casting soft golden slits across Cindy's small bedroom. I woke up tangled in cotton sheets and a silence broken only by the occasional passing car. Cindy lay beside me, arm over my chest, the air between us still thick with the scent of last night's whiskey and something dangerously comforting. My bare skin pressed against hers, and in the quiet aftermath of whatever this was, her fingers traced the faded scars across my ribs. "You okay?" she whispered, eyes half-lidded. I nodded, though the lump in my throat wasn't from sleep. "Yeah, old scars, they don't talk much anymore." She smiled faintly and kissed my shoulder. But as she cuddled closer, I felt a familiar tension creep in. This wasn't right, not for someone like me. The warmth in that room, her softness against my rough edges, it stirred something dangerous. Not the kind of danger that creeps through the woods or lurks behind motel doors, but the emotional kind. Attachment, you say? I'd been riding solo too long. I'd built walls, leaned into the silence, made peace with monsters and extremely skilled men who weren't coming back, even whose remains couldn't be cream-ted, but rather acidified because they turned. Rick's face still haunted my dreams, his torn body, the blood in the Nevada sand. And now here I was, spooning a fast food girl with sharp stories and sharper eyes. I wanted to believe there could be something here. But hell, wanting gets people killed. I couldn't bring her into my world. Not with the things I still had left to do, and the weight I carried with each step. That morning, I realized something. It's easier to face dogmen in the dark than admit you care about someone in the daylight. I rolled out of bed, pulled on my denim jeans, leather jacket, tucked my Glock neatly against the spine of my back, and slipped my blade into the holster on my right calf. She stirred, sitting up slightly, hair messy, expression soft. "You're leaving already?" she asked. I nodded and leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. "I'll call you, I mean it. You gave me the best night I've had in a long while. But I've got something important. I gotta take care of it." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed the disappointment. I left her apartment without looking back, because turning around meant changing my mind, and that was a luxury I couldn't afford. Back at my place, the usual chaos of scattered gear and half-loaded bags greeted me. I strapped up, mentally switched back into hunter mode, and hopped onto my old Harley-Davidson. It wasn't pretty anymore. Rust licked its frame and the ignition made a wheeze every time, but it still rode like a beast. It suited me. Old bones, old scars, old soul. Some blocks more and I started to feel it. There was something wrong in the air. The world didn't hum the same. People on the sidewalks threw glances that lingered a little too long. Cats perched on fences stared as if they knew something. Dogs barked from behind gates, snarling like they could smell the blood in my past. Even the sound of a child's bicycle bell set my nerves on edge. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. The kind of instinct honed from years of staring into the maw of cryptids. Something was off. When I rolled up to Edgar's compound, the hairs on my arms stood straight. The property hadn't changed much. Still the same fortress of UV lights, reinforced gates, and wire mesh fencing, but the new additions were obvious. More metal, more plating. Security cameras tracked my every move. The place looked less like a hideout and more like a bunker bracing for war. I didn't step inside. A bold red caution tape ran across the gate. "Please do not enter." Classic Edgar, always dramatic. I pulled out my phone and dialed. No response, called again. Still nothing. I lit a cigarette. Waited, called once more. I began pacing. Time passed. I smoked through an entire pack as the air grew colder and my pulse quickened. Then the phone buzzed. Edgar on the other side. His voice was low, urgent. "Some things are messy here." Behind the gravel in his tone, I heard screaming. Real screaming, men in pain. "Southern Canada, Cree territory. I'm texting you the coordinates. It's urgent. drop everything. No weapons, your dad will handle the visa, you shall be received by one Elijah Bear Stone. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen for a second, cigarettes still burning in my fingers. Canada? Cree territory? My mind raced, what could possibly stir Edgar like this? Images flared, hulking shadows, clawed figures, creatures with eyes too deep and teeth too many. Wendigos? Skinwalkers? Worse? Didn't matter, I was going, I had to. Back home, I stuffed a duffel with essentials. Clothes, satellite phone, first aid, dried jerky, a few documents. No weapons, just like Edgar said. Edgar will take care of the weapons, if required. I know the old man. This guy literally has more secrets than the entire Titanic. I called Dad. Already got your papers arranged, he said without preamble. Board the red-eye. You'll land in Winnipeg tomorrow morning. I got a contact waiting. No questions. Just move. Dad always did have his own dark network of associates. Was he CIA? Ex-military? Something murkier? I never asked, I think I preferred not knowing. My ticket was already emailed. Flight time, roughly 5 hours. Customs cleared. Identity shadowed. I didn't ask how. Before leaving, I stood at my apartment door for a while. Looked around one last time. I didn't know if I'd come back. I revved the Harley, the engine snarling like a caged wolf. El Paso faded in the mirror as I made my way to the airport. The road ahead was just another job. Edgar's voice haunted me, more shaken than I'd ever heard him. Whatever was happening out there in the Canadian wilderness, it was bad. Now sitting in the unusually dim hum of the airport terminal, I found a quiet corner near Gate B12, away from the endless chatter of tourists and red-eyed businessmen. The clinking of coffee cups, the soft jazz playing over the intercom, and the muffled sound of announcements created a strange kind of lullaby. But I wasn't calm. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out something I hadn't dared open in the past couple of days. The Reaper file. Edgar had given it to me during our first mission together. He didn't say much about it, just slid it across the table, looked me in the eye, and said, "For when you start asking questions no one wants to answer." Reaper, bold, black letters stamped on a manila folder that had seen years of hard use. The corners were dog-eared, the surface smudged with faded fingerprints, maybe even blood. No fancy logos. No government seals. Just silence sealed in paper. I opened it once again. The smell hit me first, musty and aged, like old basements and forgotten attics. Inside was chaos, but a kind of organized, brutal, methodical chaos. Let me give you a brief overview of the Reaper. The contents read like the journal of a soldier, or soldiers who hunted the paranormal, from dark creatures to demons. You name it, the file got it covered. Military-grade layouts. Pages and pages of classified coordinates, satellite surveillance images, scribbled field notes. Topographical maps littered with red excess and yellow highlights. Humanoid entities drawn in horrifying detail, some hunched and gaunt, others wide like bears, some with lupin features. Some looked like a malformed baby human and others that looked like they had crawled out of some monstrous womb. No two alike, but all shared one feature: inhumanity. I kept flipping through the file, each page drawing me deeper into read and unread secrets, which were carefully segregated according to geographical location. Quite some meticulous work, one might say. Like a fucking cryptid encyclopedia. Wendigos, dogmen, vampires, and many more. And as I searched through the contents, I hit something. Cree territory, southern Canada. It all felt like Edgar knew exactly where his destiny would take him. Underneath, hand-sketched pencil drawings. Crude yet disturbingly lifelike. Figures hunched over, their limbs too long, jaws dislocated like snakes. In human proportions. Eyes black and soulless. A label underneath that read skin crawlers. I scanned the paragraph next to the image. Subject believed to originate from Cree oral traditions. Commonly mistaken for skinwalkers, but DNA analyses show an anomaly that separates them from both Wendigo and lycanthropic classifications. Hypothesized origin: cursed humans under prolonged isolation, forced cannibalism, and subsequent mutation. Known to mimic voices of kin, shift in dim light, and create auditory hallucinations. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. The Cree tribe, a vast group of indigenous peoples spanning across central Canada. Known for their resilience, strong cultural preservation, and rich oral history. Their lands stretched from Alberta to Quebec, and their belief systems were deeply tied to nature, balance, and ancestral spirits. The legend of the skin crawlers, I learned, wasn't a tourist tale. It was passed on in hushed tones, always with warnings. Said to be cursed beings, once men, now damned. Some stories claimed they were ancient guardians gone rogue. Others said they were created when a sacred burial ground was desecrated, releasing a darkness that needed hosts. One story hit hard. In the early 1800s, during a particularly brutal winter, a Cree hunting party vanished. When the searchers went after them, they found only 2 survivors. Their eyes were glazed, their bodies trembling with white liquid oozing out of their mouth, as if poison dwelt inside. They spoke of how one by one, the hunters grew desperate and turned to eating the flesh of their dead. But after the 4th night, something changed. One man, he started walking differently, speaking in others' voices, mimicking them. By the time help arrived, he had slaughtered the others. They chained him, burned him, buried him deep in the woods. Weeks later, the grave was found empty. They say it still walks, it feeds on the flesh and soul of one, then wears the skin of the victim and moves on the next when it's done. Like a cobweb of souls taken one after another. Just when I was deep into the handwritings, the terminal announcement crackled, pulling me out of the file. Flight AC-217 to Winnipeg now boarding at Gate B12. That was my flight. A Canadian regional jet, a CR-900. Not large, but compact, sleek, and fast. I had a window seat near the back. I liked corners. Less people to watch my back from. As I stood in line, the Reaper file still buzzing in my brain, I thought of Edgar. His voice on the phone was off, shaky. This wasn't the same man who threw silver stakes like darts or decapitated monsters with surgical precision. Something had rattled him. And to think something can even make a top-tier huntsman like Edgar shake off, something is wrong, more psychological and less bloody. Was he caught in some bounty war? Or was this something more? Urgency, that's what I kept hearing in my head. The urgency in his voice wasn't tactical, it was existential. Like he was staring into the eyes of something he couldn't fight alone. Have you heard of the German Black Forest? The horrors of the place damaged the sanity of even the most trained humans. I boarded the plane, nodded to the stewardess, and took my seat. The hum of the engines brought some calm, but not for long. As we taxied out, the Reaper file sat on my lap, partially open. My eyes drifted back to that last page. The drawing of the skin crawler. The most unusual thing about it was its gaze, like it will gaze on your soul. Dogmen and vampires are violent, but this cryptid works differently. Like a part of me was getting invited to whatever my destiny as a monster hunter had to offer. Rick, my old buddy's voice came again in my earbuds as I expected. The way he screamed when he got dragged by that hairy beast out there in the Nevada desert in the open daylight, and I stood there frozen with my M16, just reaction less frozen, fucking frozen. I adjusted my seat, slipped in my earbuds, but no music played, just white noise. The plane touched down in Winnipeg with a jolt that snapped me out of a half-dream. I hadn't realized I'd drifted off. The hum of engines, the white noise in my ears, It had lulled me into something like rest, but not peace. Not with the Reaper file still clutched in my hands, its last page burning a hole through my sanity. Welcome to Cree territory, the skin crawlers. I stepped off the plane into biting cold. Cold that punches you in the lungs, like stepping into a freezer after running a marathon. Winnipeg in January was the kind of place where breath turned to mist and eyelashes froze if you blinked too slow. At the end of the terminal stood a man holding a cardboard sign with one word on it, Hunter. No name, just that he was tall, mid-40s maybe, face weathered like an old boot, wearing a tattered oilskin coat and a beanie that had seen better decades. I nodded to him. He nodded back. No handshake, no small talk. "You're Elijah Bearstone?" I asked. He looked me up and down like he was sizing up livestock. "Your eyes are tired. You seen him already." I didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the parking lot. I followed. We climbed into a rusted, World War II-era snowcat that roared like a dragon when it started. Inside, it smelled like motor oil and cedar bark. There were totems tied to the dash, bones and feathers hanging like war trophies. As we drove into the endless white, Elijah finally spoke. "My brother went missing in these woods. Came back 3 weeks later. Looked like him. Spoke like him. Mama cooked stew for him, cried while she poured it in the bowl. But he didn't eat. Just sat there looking at the walls. He went quiet. Next morning, Mama's tongue was in the sink, still moving. He didn't say anything else for 2 hours. We hit the tree line just before sunset. The boreal forest stretched out like something from a true detective fever dream. Snow-laden branches sagged, creaked, and noisy sounds like gossiping ghosts. Occasional flicker of shadows in the distance and near. The cabin was exactly what I expected. No chimney, no woodpile, no smoke, just steel and concrete. Military-style prefab hidden beneath thick camouflage netting and dead spruce branches. Elijah stopped the snowcat, turned off the engine. "This is where I leave you. Aren't you coming in?" "I ain't going inside." Before I could ask what he meant, he revved the snowcat and disappeared into the trees. I walked the last 100 feet, boots crunching against the ice, hand instinctively resting near my Glock. I knocked on the steel door. "You there, Edgar?" Still silence, then I saw it. Blood, frozen and black, smeared on the keypad by the entrance. Like bullets shot from someone trying to escape or to hide or to survive, standard pistol rounds. Smudged fingerprints, like someone had tried to punch in a code with hands full of holes. I punched in the default override Edgar taught me months ago. The door hissed and groaned as it opened. Inside was a war zone. Bunk beds overturned, UV lights shattered, silver rounds spilled across the concrete floor. There were claw marks in the walls, deep and wide. No bodies, just chaos. And in the corner, Edgar's journal. It lay open, scrawled in handwriting that was a cross between Morse code and a schizophrenic priest's confessions. One line repeated like a drumbeat. "They wear the face but not the soul." I flipped through the rest. Final entry. "Don't trust the one who remembers your name." What the hell had Edgar walked into? The cabin had no power. I lit a kerosene lamp and did a slow sweep. No blood trails leading out. No signs of escape. Just a broken place that felt violated. I bunked there that night. Glock under pillow. Blade tucked in my boot. But I barely slept. Because at around 3 a.m., I heard scratching on the outside wall. Followed by a voice. "Son, open the door." It was Edgar's voice. My blood went cold, but I didn't move. The voice came again. "Come on now, it's cold out here, don't be stupid." I crept toward the small viewing slit near the door and slid it open. I whispered, "What's your middle name, Edgar?" Silence, then a low growl. The thing outside started laughing. The sound like chewing glass. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Because in our line o' work, we do not charge like madmen. We study, observe, and execute only when the time is right. At dawn, I left the cabin, this time determined to find answers. But a mile down the trail, I saw him, Edgar, the real old man Edgar. Wounded, pale, but alive. He stumbled toward me with that familiar grimace. "You really took your time," he muttered. I reached for my Glock, still suspicious. "What's your middle name?" "Raymond, and I still hate it?" I sighed in relief. "You were here the whole time?" He nodded. "Barely. They tried to replace me. Tried to make me walk into the hollow. But I held out. They feed off belief, off fear. I never gave them my full name. That's how they almost got you." As we walked, Edgar explained what little he knew. The creatures we called skin crawlers weren't just shapeshifters. They were remnants, fragments of spirits and ancient curses, things older than language itself. The Cree knew them well. We returned to Elijah, who had waited, armed and alert. With him was Miska, a young Cree woman painted in traditional symbols, a dreamwalker who saw omens in stars and snowflakes. She led us through the forest as dusk fell. The village we arrived at was humble, wooden lodges, fire pits, smoke curling from chimneys, and eyes watching from every dark corner. People here didn't smile often. Their eyes carried the weight of survival. Elders sat in silence, some holding bones carved into talismans. Children were ushered indoors as we passed. The atmosphere was tense, reverent, wary. That night, gathered around a sacred fire, an elder named Awanik told us a tale. Long ago, when men and spirits walked the same land, there was a shaman who tried to cheat death. He trapped his spirit between bodies, wearing skin like clothes. But each time he wore a new face, he lost more of himself. Eventually, he forgot who he was, became something else. Now he is many. They call them the Edicu, skin thieves. They said the hollow was the last place he was seen, where his scream still echoes between worlds. And now, that scream was waking things up again. Over the last 20 years, more than 40 hikers have vanished in this part of Canada. Forest Service chalks it up to weather and disorientation. But the Cree understands. Their tribal maps are marked with symbols, places to avoid, whispers carried on pine needles. Local hunters find old drawings nailed to trees, childlike sketches of stick figures with twisted faces, wide mouths, and missing eyes. Most chilling of all, those drawings always appear a day before someone disappears. The tribal leaders didn't trust outsiders. Paranormal teams from Toronto, even a US-based cryptid outfit, all came and vanished within days. Edgar had been called because he wasn't just another glory-chasing ghostbuster. He was the guy people called when the missing stopped showing up altogether. Edgar volunteered to understand the mystery behind and whether he could find a scientific solution more than bullets or shamans to stop these killings. With this much blood in the snow, we knew what had to be done. Edgar and I, side by side, were going back into the hollow. By the time we crossed the first ice ridge, we were already breathing different air. It wasn't panic. Edgar and I didn't panic. It was more like we were walking through a bad memory we hadn't had yet. Elijah took the lead, calm as stone. Miska followed beside him, muttering under her breath in Cree. Her words weren't for us. They were for whatever might be listening. Edgar and I, we kept our pace slow, deliberate. We weren't jumpy kids fresh out of some armchair ghost hunting podcast. Between the two of us, we tracked vampire nests, killed dogmen. This wasn't new, but it was different. "Feels like we're walking inside a thought," Edgar said. I didn't answer, because he was right. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The kind of cold that makes you forget what warmth ever felt like. Snow didn't crunch here. Compass needles wobbled even when still. Radio signals choked to static. We came across remnants. First, a half-collapsed tent with snow packed so neatly around it, it looked like it had been tucked in. A sleeping bag zipped, undisturbed. No one inside, no footprints either. Then a GoPro. Cracked in half, lens shattered, but its SD card was miraculously intact. Elijah pocketed it without a word. We kept moving. Next came the bark. Trees clawed with nails, not knives. Messages in English and Cree. It's wearing my voice. Don't listen if it says your name. I walked with myself today. Edgar exhaled, slow. This place isn't hunting us. No, it's studying us, I said. We found a knotted trail of bones, deer, maybe human, arranged in a spiral around a reflective patch of ice. It was a mirror as much as it was frozen water. Miska stopped short. No one looks in. Yes, understood, I said, adjusting the strap of my gear. Edgar gave a half shrug, eyes lingering a second too long. That night, our camp was made between wind-bent pines, with salt circles, UV towers, and silver charms strung between branches. We ate canned beans and dried jerky. Edgar didn't mention the ice. I didn't press. Edgar told that the previous day, 2 of his men were taken by a tall, lanky figure. They kept shooting outside the cabin, but nothing could be seen except the occasional view of its shadow. When Edgar was busy calling for reinforcements, that's when the men vanished, never to be found. Edgar kept searching for them the entire night. I could relate to Edgar's story as I then remembered Edgar's shaky voice. He was battling things that couldn't be seen. At 3:17 a.m., a child cried from the woods, like it was lost and cold. This was the exact sound that followed us everywhere. We didn't move, just listened as it sobbed, then stopped, then laughed. The pattern sounded disturbing, but you couldn't let it ruin your purpose, so we just let it pass. Elijah sipped coffee from a tin cup and said, "Third night in a row." We stayed calm, like men who'd been in worse places. But our hands stayed near our weapons. The next morning, we found the graveyard. It wasn't bodies. It was things, gear, IDs, handwritten journals, pocket knives, thermoses, all arranged like some twisted shrine. 50 names carved into one large stone. Miska knelt in front of it and whispered something I didn't catch. She stood again without a word, but her hands trembled. Edgar crouched beside a half-buried camcorder. The battery was dead, but I popped out the card and slid it into the reader on our sat phone. It played one corrupted file before the rest went dark. A man, pale and calm, stared into the camera. If this reaches anyone, don't trust what bleeds blue in the dark. Then something burst from his mouth. The feed died. We all understood that he was consumed by whatever evil had resided in this place. Later, we reached a canyon. There was no trace of winds or birds. Silent forest gives you the creeps always. Like the forest itself was holding its breath. Smell of burnt copper lingered still. Elijah stopped walking. We call this place the cathedral. Stalactites above looked like hung bodies. The cave mouth looked creepy and weird. Inside, the ground crunched. Crushed antlers, ribs, finger bones were all over the place. Miska whispered, "Here the first shaman was skinned for breaking his oath." Our breath fogged in reverse. The name skin crawlers, it made a bit sense. Edgar grunted as he adjusted his coat. Looks like the OG was even confused as how to handle the situation that went beyond normal bullets or traps. The cave listened, and we stood there between gods and ghosts, knowing we were being watched by something old and ancient. We pushed farther west along the timberline, following a ridge that locals claimed had once been a logging trail before the forest swallowed it whole. The snow deepened to our knees, but we didn't feel the cold anymore. Edgar and I walked in stealth, quiet, eyes peeled, no wasted breath. He kept scanning tree lines, and I kept watching the sky, waiting for it to make the first move. We were maybe 2 clicks from camp when we found the village. There was no name to it, and neither was it on the map. Half-buried cabins and a chapel rotting inward from its steeple. The snow hadn't touched the roofs. Like something warm and wrong breathed from the wood. Elijah was first to speak. "We're past the river forks. This place shouldn't exist." Miska froze behind him. Her mouth moved in prayer, but her eyes were locked on a single home. A squat 2-room shack with windows blacked out from the inside. She didn't follow as we moved closer. Edgar stopped in the doorway of the chapel. "You smell that?" I nodded. Pine, blood, and cinnamon. From inside, soft footsteps. Like a child dragging their feet through ash. The chapel's insides had warped. The altar was gone, replaced by a table of bones laid out in patterns. Some ritualistic, some just cruel. The pews had carvings on their backs, faces without mouths. All of them facing the table. And on that table, a record player, spinning without power. It crackled and we listened. A man's voice, clear and sad. "We built this place because the Hollow promised to make us gods. It kept its promise. We're just not the kind of gods we wanted to be." The recording ended with a child's whisper. "He walks backwards." We backed out, calm, slow, professional. Edgar looked at me with that same stare he would give in times of distress. Reminds me of his classic line. "This isn't a fight we win, just one we walk away from in time to reload." Nevertheless, to say the truth, this was entirely a new experience. No primal savagery, but the fight is more psychological. Outside, Elijah found a cellar entrance beneath the snow. Locked, rusted shut with a chain so old it turned to flakes at his touch. Inside was darkness, inside was silence. We opened it anyway. The tunnel beneath sloped downward, carved into natural earth, but reinforced with bones. Leg bones, ribs, femurs lined the ceiling like beams. On the walls, black fungus shaped like Cree runes pulsed faintly. At the bottom, a room. A fireplace flickered to life as we entered. It just lit. Things were getting way beyond our comprehension. How possibly could science explain it? On the mantel, dozens of photographs. Black and white. Unfaded, families smiling, children holding hands with men in ranger uniforms. One photo showed a boy with Miska's eyes, younger, laughing. Mishka collapsed. Leja caught her. "I dreamed this place," she whispered. "Years ago, I thought it was nothing." Back outside, the village was older and decayed. Time moved here like smoke, thick, choking, and never in the right direction. "We sleep here tonight?" I asked, half a joke. Edgar answered without humor. "We might already be." We set up camp just outside the old chapel. Silver stakes, salt rings, mirrors faced outward. Every 15 minutes, Elijah rang a bell we'd blessed with fox blood and cedar oil. It was their ritual. At 3:17 a.m., the crying returned. Closer this time, a little girl, maybe 5. Her voice bounced wrong, like playback audio. We packed light. No maps, no assumptions, but just instinct and memory, the only 2 things the Hollow hadn't twisted yet. Edgar walked a pace ahead, slower now, like he was measuring each step with a part of himself that didn't trust the ground. His breath clouded behind him, but only when he wasn't speaking. I noticed that, so did Miska. The Cree elder met us by the ridge. A woman, cloaked in layers of bear hide and bark, her face painted with soot and bone-white ash. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at Edgar, then me, then at the Hollow like it had insulted her ancestors. Maybe it had. "We thought it was gone," she finally said, "buried beneath the teeth of time. But it remembers blood. It comes back for more." She gave us tools. A charm made from sinew and raven feathers, smeared in ochre. salt that had been prayed over for 7 nights, buried under wolves' graves. And a small mirror, cracked down the center. "Hold this up when it speaks," she warned. "The creature's truth cannot pass its own reflection." Miska translated the final part. "If it sees itself, it bleeds backwards." We descended as the sky broke open. The sound of our boots pressing into frost was constantly ringing like a noisy ceiling fan that wasn't tired from years of rotation. Finally, we saw what we were searching for. At the center of a glade where it was impossible for a clearing, the forest bent downward, like a crater had been dug from gravity alone. Trees warped around it, roots exposed and curling like fingers holding a wound. In that bowl of earth, the chapel again. But different now, older, cracked open from above like something had clawed its way out. Inside, the pews were gone and the altar, too. In their place, bones, stacked from floor to ceiling. Not just human, but elk, dog and bear. Some we couldn't identify. The shapes were wrong, joints too many, skulls too long. Whatever the hell it was, it fed on the souls of both humans and animals alike. At the center of it all, a figure. It didn't move. Antlers like frozen lightning. Skin like it had been grown instead of worn, seamed and wrinkled. Its face was a mirror, perfect, untouched. And in it I saw myself. Not my reflection. My regrets, every kill, every failure. Every time I hesitated, Edgar stepped forward. "I made a deal," he said. The thing didn't reply with sound. But the mirror flickered. We all saw it. Images burned into ice. Cambodia, 1989. Edgar, younger, bloodied. A woman screaming in a field of bones, then silence. Edgar turned to me. "You know what it wants. If I stay, it sleeps. For another 50 years, maybe. If I leave, if I break the pact, it wakes hungry." "You're not a sacrifice," I said. Edgar muttered. "We need to end this thing." Then the shaman's charm began to shake. The feathers spun like they were caught in a wind we couldn't feel. The mirror cracked further, humming. The antlered figure began to move. No footsteps, just repositioning. Like it blinked across space, breathing closer each time. I pulled the mirror up. The reflection showed its true form, not one creature, but many, bound together by grief. Faces, mouths, thousands, all crying inward. Edgar recognized the faces of his men that was taken by the hollow just days back before my arrival. I threw the salt ring. Miska lit the cedar branch. Elijah read the glyph we'd practiced 3 times under breath. The air ignited with silence. A void tore open behind the creature. It hissed, steam and sorrow, and stepped backward, into itself, into memory. The hollow groaned like a dying mountain. The trees straightened. The chapel crumbled. And Edgar, he didn't move. "You still here?" I asked. He nodded. "Don't worry, son. Life is a journey. Unprecedented things do happen. I am prepared for my fate." We climbed out of the glade. The elder waited. "You returned," she said, not surprised. We didn't speak on the way back. No one asked what the creature was, not really. Because we knew it was memory, it was promise, and yet it was alive. But why did it not attack? It was everything left behind in dark places, waiting to be fed. Perhaps it hunts on its own accord. And then we might end up either finishing it off or the other way round. After we left the hollow, the forest stayed quiet. No dreams full of bone altars or mirrored faces. But quiet isn't peace. We both knew that. Quiet is when things shift underground. When memory has time to stretch. Edgar and I camped near the creek just beyond the marked tribal zone. Miska stayed back at the elder lodge. Said her dreams were getting heavier, like something had followed us out, wearing our scent. By night we started hearing it, the same child's voice, singing, soft, broken, always just out of reach. At exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, we went back to the Cree village before sunrise. The elder was waiting with others, 6 women, 3 men, all with ceremonial soot across their brows. She motioned us inside the longhouse. The air inside was heavy with sage smoke and the reek of old blood. I asked Edgar, how do we kill this thing? Edgar warned me not to even utter a word before any of them. We kill it when it attacks us. Before then, there would be no use. Edgar and I didn't speak much after the hollow sealed. We weren't shaken, not like rookies, but something sat heavy in our bones, like sleep that never finishes. We were elite hunters. We'd seen cryptids tear men in half, and demons wear a pastor's face like a carnival mask. But this wasn't just another kill mission. It was something ancient, trying to nest inside our memory. We stayed near the village. The tribe gave us a longhouse to ourselves, a woodstone hut perched just off the river, wrapped in cedar branches and salt lines. The elders kept a healthy distance, though the children still stared like we might start levitating or bleeding light. On the second night, I sat with Edgar under a frostbitten canopy, fire low, boots off, rifle close. He was stripping and oiling his sidearm, same one he'd carried since the Honduras job back in '98. I was just staring out at the trees, watching the shadows move like they had somewhere to be. "You miss the States?" I asked. He smirked. "You mean the bills, traffic, and every ex-girlfriend who still thinks I owe them an apology? I mean fast food and asphalt, music on the radio, warm beer in a Vegas motel." He was quiet for a moment. "Still miss it though," I said. "Yeah, I miss normal. Here the silence isn't just environmental, it's spiritual. The cold seeps through your gear and into your blood. You start feeling like an echo of yourself." Stateside, we had cities buzzing like hornets, satellite phones, AR-15s in every truck. Here, your best weapon was old belief and a name you weren't supposed to speak aloud. We checked our gear every morning. Edgar packed his custom .44 Magnum revolver, silver-jacketed rounds, and a bone-handled knife etched with glyphs we didn't understand but respected. I carried a suppressed M4, hollow points soaked in cedar oil, plus an old Cree war club gifted to me by Miska. Our armor was light, tactical Kevlar layered with ash-dusted leather bands, ritual protection stitched by the tribe. No logos, just symbols of power. You didn't come here dressed like Call of Duty. You came ready to bleed for a reason. That morning, the elder returned. Her eyes were sunken, but her spine straighter than before. "We'll need help," Edgar said. "Not a team but a guide." The elder nodded. "We will send the Whisperer." She arrived by dusk, wrapped in gray deer hide, eyes clouded by ritual ash, and bearing a satchel of carved teeth, dried marrow, and bones that sang when the wind touched them. "She can walk the space between memory and earth," the elder explained. "But only if protected." We loaded what we could, gear, rations, enough ammo to make a cartel nervous. The Whisperer didn't bring food. Just a mirror shard and a coil of salt thread she braided into Edgar's wrist. I realized in that moment that the tribes did help us with the necessities. We camped just outside the circle that night. Just cold coffee, silver-loaded guns, and the sound of frost creeping through our tents like fingers. Edgar cleaned his revolver while I adjusted the trigger on my M4. Between us, a pile of glyph-etched traps and a Cree war club rested within reach. "Been thinking," I said. "Remember our first meet, where I was clueless of what hell did I encounter in the desert messing up Rick?" Edgar chuckled. "You trying to reminisce or keep your brain from fracturing?" "Both. I miss warm beer, loud music, being bored." He paused, loading another silver-jacketed round. "The States feel like a joke now, like a memory someone else had. Here, it's all bones and breath. Back home, we fought monsters with shotguns. Here the monsters wear our names. We both went alert, heard low breathing, just outside the salt line. But we didn't panic, focused. Edgar switched to infrared. At a point, between the trees, maybe 20 feet out, stood someone. Fuck, that was my own reflection. Same jacket, same bootlace half-tied, same scar from the vampire attacks. But the eyes, those weren't mine. They were blank. "Don't shoot," Edgar murmured. "It wants us to make the first move. Wants to see how we react." The thing tilted its head, then smiled wide and dry, like paper stretching. And to the surprise, it spoke my voice. "You always leave your safety off when you're nervous." My blood ran cold. That was true. Only Edgar knew that. Then another voice, from behind us. "Hey, you dropped something." We spun, and to our goddamn fucking surprise, it was another Edgar. Same revolver, same jacket. Holding an old photo, Edgar in Vietnam. "I'm real, son. Hold to your instincts," he said quietly. I didn't answer. Instead, I said, "Your second wife's name." "Maria, hated cats, loved bourbon. You met her once in Dallas." He was right, the other Edgar smiled. "You remember how I tried to explain this was all more psychological and less monstrous? The fact is, these events will literally fuck up your neurons, your motor skills, and when you go off your senses, it will wear you skin after feeding on you." The thing moved with abrupt walks. It wasn't humanly. Weird sounds followed. Edgar fired before it reached the trees. The slug hit the creature's skull, no splatter. Just shadow, inky and smoke-thin, twisting in the air before dissolving into nothing. The false me just watched, then said in my voice, "Next time, I'll wear your smile tighter." It vanished into the fog. The whisper finally spoke again. "It has learned your shape." At exactly 3:17 a.m., the sound came again. A child's voice from the trees. "Daddy, remember me?" We didn't answer, but Edgar's hand never left his gun. Edgar carried his tried and tested .44 Magnum revolver, custom-chambered for silver-jacketed hollow points and rigged with a grip carved from elk antler. It kicked like hell but had saved him more than once. He kept a belt of bone-carved sigils and one flask of black salt whiskey, not for drinking, just in case something needed burning inside out. I carried an M4 with a short barrel, suppressor, and a mag of cedar oil-treated rounds. Secondary was a tomahawk carved from obsidian and white oak, gifted to me in Montana after a windwalker hunt. Our armor was stitched by the Cree, a blend of ballistic nylon and ash-hardened hide, embedded with feathers, salt beads, and etchings in Old Tongue. Tactical by design, sacred by necessity. We followed its trail deeper into the treeline, past where even the whisperer dared not step. The monster hadn't vanished. It had retreated, as if returning home, as if daring us to come closer. And we did because we were hunters, not saints. It had taken too many. It had worn too many faces. The hollow demanded closure, and Edgar and I didn't leave tabs open. By dawn, the pine canopy opened again, and what stood before us was no forest clearing. It was a cathedral. The bone whisperer stopped cold. "This is its nest," she said, barely audible. "And its church. We don't find its location, but if revealed itself, it means something." Edgar and I exchanged no words, just loaded fresh rounds. Inside it was quiet, like a church before the bomb drops. We stepped carefully, weapons raised, ears tuned for the scrape of movement or the whisper of breath. And then we saw them. The missing hikers, dozens of them, frozen in posture, their eyes vacant. Still breathing somehow, their souls somewhere else. Suspended in stasis or ritual, their fingers twitching as if playing invisible strings. "He keeps them as memories," the whisperer murmured. like pages from a book he can reread. Edgar exhaled slowly. "We ending this now." The heart on the altar beat once. Then again, and then the skin fucking crawler came. No longer bothering with faces or unnecessary mind games. It dropped from the ceiling like a marionette, limbs tangled, then straightening with sickening cracks. Its form was shifting constantly, patches of skin, bone, bark, and shadow all colliding like paint on a dying canvas. It let out a soundless howl, a rupture in the air that made the bone walls tremble. We opened fire. Rounds lit the darkness, cedar smoke and silver casings filling the air. The mimic screamed, a silent scream, too deep to hear but strong enough to shake blood loose from our ears. Edgar moved left, I strafed right. We flanked it, keeping distance, forcing it to shift shape faster than it wanted. Its body started to betray it. Too many forms. Too many stolen pieces. It staggered, split in two for a breath, then reformed like boiling wax. "Do it now!" Edgar shouted. I threw the trap, a glyph-lined snare circle of rawhide soaked in grave salt and whisper ash. The thing stumbled into it, and for the first time, it slowed. Its scream ripped the silence open, and then the heart on the altar burst. Black-red mist shot upward, the whole cathedral shaking. The monster flailed, its body caught in the burning lines of the trap. "End it once and for all," I shouted to the whisperer. She stepped forward, removed a bone needle from her satchel, and plunged it into the skin crawler's chest. Its body lit up in runes. It burned, not with fire, but with memory, images flashing across its body like dying stars. Every soul it had taken, every life it had worn. A soldier, a mother, a boy with a red scarf. Edgar in his 20s. Me, crying over the werewolf encounter, like every fear was getting revealed. Then it turned to ash. The walls of the cathedral cracked. Bones began to fall. We grabbed who we could, dragging the stasis-trapped hikers from the altar chamber. The whole thing was coming down. Ribs collapsed, antlers cracked, skulls shattered underfoot. We didn't stop until we were out. Behind us, the cathedral of bone collapsed inward, not like a building, but like a mouth finally closing. The sun rose, the hollow exhaled. The whisperer vanished, walking back into the trees, like her purpose was complete. Edgar looked at me. "The state sounds good again. Let's finish the paperwork first." We left with 17 survivors. No news coverage, no witnesses, and no evidence of the skin crawler's end remains. We have been warned not to carry any of its part with us, or it will bring a bad omen, so didn't collect any bounty. The forest closed behind us like a scar that knew how to hide itself. We followed the trail with hope. The forest led us, even though we pretended to lead ourselves. Down paths that hadn't existed an hour before. Over roots that pulsed like veins. By dusk, we found the opening, and thus our mission to the Cree territory was somewhat complete, unsatisfied with our brains almost sane again. 3 days later, we are back at Edgar's den in El Paso. We didn't bring back its body or bones or skin or whatever, nothing as a trophy. I dropped my gear onto the same couch I'd passed out on a dozen times. Edgar was tired as hell. He just came in, tossed his coat on the floor, and opened the fridge. "Warm beer, maybe pizza sounds nice, we'll order some," he muttered. "Tastes better than victory." I sat across from him. And yes, to be honest, pizza reminded me of Miss Cindy and her company again. At the end, warm hug, family, and some love feels like a blessing, right? We didn't need to say it, but I said it anyway. "We're not gonna be the same after this." Edgar nodded. "Weren't the same before it." Outside, the sun was bright like it owed it something. Inside, we sat in the stillness. No forest, yet chambers of secrets beneath us in the basement and the hum of the air conditioner Edgar still hadn't fixed. "You ever think you've been doing this too long?" I asked. He shrugged. "Better than waiting to be eaten by something dumber." True, maybe God always had prepared us for this battle. We stared at the wall for a while. And then, after a long while again, we talked normal. About food, about old sitcoms. About Edgar's dogs, including late Ragnar, the pit bull, and the time Edgar got shot because he insulted a chupacabra cult in Albuquerque. We faced monsters before, monsters that hunt you down, but the last encounter will forever be remembered. We barely survived. And sometimes, in this business, that's the same damn thing. If you liked today's episode, please show some love and do subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow. And irrespective of any situation, never let darkness consume you. Thank you very much. See you another time.